Today was the day where we got the robot revolution, a new story for the 15th so-called Doctor in Doctor Who. I sat down early this morning for about 46 minutes, and here's what I've got to say. But before I do that, hello and welcome back to Chat About It, Don't Shout About It with me, Rachel, the Queen of the Woke, as crowned by one of my haters. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe to the channel, switch on the notification bells so that you know I am releasing another video. We're trying to get to 2k subscribers. Can we do it? Thank you to everyone who has joined me already. I can't run this channel without you. So, before I get on with this review, I'm going to say this like I said with all of my other previous 15th Doctor reviews. If you like the 15th Doctor and you like this story, then that's okay. It's okay to like something, and it's also okay to not like it. It will be interesting to hear from both sides as to what you may think of this story. I always miss something out, so please do leave your comments in the comments section below. Our story of the Robot Revolution was written by Russell T Davies and directed by Peter Hoare. I think I said that correctly. It opens with the new companion, Belinda Chandra, 17 years in the past. Here we see her boyfriend, Adam, talking about the stars, being quite romantic, a stereotypical gamer as well, I must say. He says that he named a star after her. Little does she know that this star is going to create a mass of problems. Fast forward 17 years later, and we see that she is working as a nurse in a hospital. The Doctor lands in the same hospital. He's clearly looking for someone, but we don't know at that point that it's going to be Belinda. He fails to connect with her, and she goes home. During the night, a spaceship lands in her garden. The robots crash through her house and demand that she accompanies them to their home planet where they are from. She does that at the detriment to the cat, and the Doctor misses her by less than a minute. Just prior to that, though, we do see Mrs. Flood doing her Susan Twist appearance. She speaks to Belinda, and as far as we know, she does not pass on the message that Belinda gave her to say that she has been captured by robots. She sees the Doctor, that's Mrs. Flood that is, she sees the Doctor. She breaks the fourth wall, very briefly, and then runs inside. Whilst in the spaceship, the robots explain that because the star had been named after her, she was to go with them to their planet and she says that it's not her fault, that it was Adam's fault, her ex-boyfriend's, and she told them where he was. We see the Doctor following the robots' spaceships in his TARDIS. He fails to catch up with her, and we see what looks like time distortion, which we later learn it's not time distortion, it was a fracture in time. I guess it's the same thing, but maybe perhaps more serious. The Doctor lands 6 months behind, and she lands at the time that she was supposed to arrive in accordance to the timeline. There on the planet named Miss Belinda Chandra. She has to be crowned as the Queen. She does not want to be crowned as the Queen, but she concedes because she feels she is under the pressure to do so. The Doctor, who had been posing as a historian, comes forward and gives her a backstory, but he's not really making much sense on the surface. And the reason why he is not making much sense is because he is trying to relay a message to her. However, he can only say that message with every 9 words, and that is because the robots apparently cannot hear the 9th word that is said in a sentence. She figures this out somewhat quickly, and she replies to him, and she and the Doctor are able to escape while the other inhabitants hold off the robots. They escape to an underground tunnel, and she assists with helping the sick in the underground area where they are hiding out. However, she decides to use the cleaning robot, which the doctor had deactivated because it was a tracker for the robots, to give them her location so that she could sacrifice herself. Oh yes, impossible companion. She gets taken to the big AI, which seems to be the controller of everything that is going on. However, she and the doctor discover that the AI is not some big, gigantic robot as they had thought it was. The robots had listened to what she had said about her ex-boyfriend, Adam. They went and they captured him, and they brought him to the planet, Miss Belinda Chandra. They put him inside this gigantic machine, and he was the one that started the robot revolution. He was the controller of everything. We learned that he had been rejected in marriage by Belinda, and for that reason, her reason was coercive control. She merges her star certificate with his copy of the star certificate, which had been retrieved in the timeline. It's also important to note that these two copies are the exact same copy, and so when they met, naturally, of course, they went kaboom, and we had all of this weird distortion and images going off around her and Adam. Then the doctor saves her very quickly, but not before we finish seeing all of these images. Adam dies and gets cleaned up by the cleaner. The doctor laughs about it. However, she demands that the doctor takes her home. He draws the connection that he had met her descendant in the future. She's enthralled by this, but she's so angry with him because he took her DNA without her permission. She continues to demand to go home. The doctor agrees to take her home. He tries to land on the date that they had left, which was the 24th of May. However, something is preventing him from doing so. In order to get her home, she has to go the long way around. All right. I will start by saying this to you. This was a million times better, if that's even possible, than the last series opening, which was Space Babies. And it was good to be on an alien planet, not Earth. Thankfully, Russell T Davies seems to have used his brain a little bit and steered it away from the goofy, stupid, silly openings that he tends to prefer. I would say this is probably a one-trick pony moment. I would say it's up to you whether or not you believe me, but if you hear anyone else saying it, it's generally because I think, in my opinion, that is true, but you don't have to believe me, of course. There are really good points about this. However, there are also really bad points about this. I would say this story is perhaps mid at best, which seems to be a concurrent theme that goes on throughout the last series, and it seems to be going into this one. Now, my opinion will be that, just my opinion. You can disagree with it, it's fine, and we will cover other people's opinions when we look at overnight ratings. I think that would be a nice thing to do this time, see what other people are saying in the ratings videos. It's a shame, though, that this story has to have a mid at best rating. I always want to give them more, but I just can't. I think the story is trying to be way too clever, and it shot its own self in the foot by doing so. However, before I get to those details, let's have a look at some of the good points, because there are good points. The Disney money looks like it has been spent a lot better this time. So in the last series, a lot of the money went on the budget for Sutek in the Vortex, which let that series down a lot. However, in this series, it would appear, and I'm just saying appear at the moment, that a lot more thought has been put into it. So, for example, when the robots came crashing down from outer space to capture Belinda, the rocket landing in the garden looked pretty good. Sure, it wasn't as good as it possibly could be, and I wish that they had given it more detail, because they keep selling it as a cinema status brand and it needs that Hollywood cash injection for its development. But compared to the giant slugs, and yes, I will stand by that statement that I made on the Sensphere, get better slugs, I will take that landing any day. And whilst I do think that the robots look a little bit more than just ridiculous. I think that because they are utilised surprisingly very well, or bar one bit, it made it easier to not be distracted by their appearance as much. However, their faces made me think of that Peter Capaldi story where the faces of the robots had like emoji faces of some description. So I mentioned that there was a bit with the robots that were not as well utilized as it could have been, and that was their weakness. Their weakness is that they can't hear the ninth word in every sentence, something along those lines, right? Now, when the Doctor is communicating the message to Belinda and Belinda communicates back, all through that scene, they were using the ninth word to communicate that message. It is a little bit confusing and it takes a while to grasp what he is trying to say and what he is doing, although the other way around. And you probably have to watch it a couple of times in order to get it. This plot device is also something that they failed to use a bit later on when Belinda was giving herself up to the robots. How did they not think of utilizing that plot point in that type of situation? This is why I think this shot itself in the foot. It was what I would deem to be quite messy, and yet they did that. And then later on, when she is going to sacrifice herself in the AI room with the big robot, they suddenly use that tactic again. It's almost like whoever was doing the continuity checking on the script seemed to have missed that one. I feel like that it is an important plot point that should not have been missed out. If the robots cannot hear the ninth word in every sentence, then you've got the opportunity throughout the entire story to use that plot device. But they didn't. However, if it was also intentionally done that way in order to go about certain plot points, then I would say that perhaps this shouldn't have been used in the first place, because not only are you going to create yourself a nice big plot hole, but also if you want to use it in every single scene where the robots were and you were trying to convey a message, that will get notoriously confusing. So you see what this does? It convolutes itself. It becomes its own worst logistical nightmare that essentially wrote its own plot holes. Clever. There's also a scene where they're talking about timey-wimey. Yes, that phrase is back with a vengeance. The delivery of that scene where they were talking about different timelines and how things are crossing over and not entirely making much sense because it was delivered way too quickly. They needed to slow that down. I'm all for making things obtainable just over someone's head. It's a fact that I bring up a lot when I talk about Doctor Who and perhaps some other things, but you've got to have good pacing in order to achieve that. Yes, okay, I may have had to have gone back and looked at it, even if it was slowed down. So I've got the full context of what was going on. But the direction of it, the pace of it, the delivery, the speech of the actors, it was all too quick. You see how fast I said that? Did you catch what I just said? I said it was all too quick. This could have been something that you could have slowed down. You could have had them both discover this at the same time and have it explained with some form of coherence rather than going through it at the speed of light. Now, we're talking about the speed of light. I would say for the most part, Ncuti was a fair bit calmer in this until the end, that is. I don't think he had a lot of choice, but he had to be calmer in this. He is still not the Doctor. He is still very much a miscast. However, he does a much better performance when he slows it down and he doesn't go OTT. Unfortunately, he does cry again. He's crying because he lost his friend. They are in the face of danger, and I would rather see him being more like the Doctor and getting on with it rather than crying. And I am at the stage now where I am beginning to think that this is more of an acting choice from Ncuti. His performances still very much are like, I am acting, I am angry, I am sad, now I am happy, and now I'm surprised, with very little progression between his thought process and his actions. He is better in the importance of being earnest, I will say. Other than that, the crime 17 minutes in, the majority of it is fine until the scene where Alan dies. I don't know if this was direction or if this was an acting choice or a script or all three. However, it does not make any sense. The doctor laughs after Alan dies. Come on. So let's get this straight. The doctor cries and mourns the loss of his friend. Belinda gives him sympathy, even though she does not know who he is or who his friend was. She then meets her ex-boyfriend, who she also has a connection with. She makes a connection with the certificate that she has for the star, with his copy of the certificate that he has for the star. He goes boom. She loses someone that was part of her life theoretically, even though she didn't like him, and she has been taken by robots and been put through a huge ordeal. And he refers to Alan as a sperm in an egg, metaphorically, because he was microscopic, which I'm sure is going to generate plenty of questions from little children. He laughs, kicks the air, and then turns around and says, babes. Highly sensitive of a Time Lord, don't you think? And not a trait that I would associate with the Doctor. Whilst the Doctor may not always be emotionally connecting with a human because he is alien, I'm pretty sure consistently he does not have that type of reaction. But apparently he does now. I don't like the fact that Alan became microscopic, and they used the sperm in an egg metaphor to describe it. And I really do not like the fact that the cleaner then came forward, the cleaner robot that is, came forward and cleaned Alan up. I just felt like that seemed to be very contriving to the plot point. I don't know how I feel about it. Normally the resolution of a story is so much more, even in the respects of Russell T Davies, when a baddie is defeated. I thought maybe it was childish. However, in this case, I'm not surprised because we had that ending with space babies. And this has got to be, though, the first time that we have seen this Doctor save his companion. Okay, it's like 2 seconds, but he did save her. Shock, horror. What I didn't like, though, was that it was so anticlimactic with how he went about it. He was captured by the robot, and all of a sudden he is free in order to pull her back. I wanted so much more than what we see with the Doctor being a hero. And he just ran forward and pulled her back. However, a change is as good as a rest, I suppose you could say. And hopefully he will go that one step further and it'll be more adventurous next time. This story, I feel like, is trying to emulate Stephen Moffat. And the reason why I say that is because it was seemingly trying to do a flashback 17 years in the past, back to present day, and then it says that the Doctor had to live on the planet Miss Belinda Chandra for 6 months before connecting with Belinda on the planet, who had been there only for 2 hours. On top of that, they're also talking about the timeline of the star certificate and the fact that the robots went back over 10 years previously to get Alan, who was the instigator of the robot revolution. That sounds complicated. That sounds convoluted. That is contrived. I don't mind it trying to emulate a Stephen Moffat story. In fact, he may have even had some input. Who knows? However, compared to Stephen Moffat, I don't think Russell T Davies has the ability to show these different timelines alongside each other. This story could have been 2 parts, or it could have been longer, and he could have shown us what the Doctor was doing, and how Belinda and the Doctor were separated off into the two timelines. And we see what is happening with Belinda and what is happening with the Doctor, how he figures out the robots can't hear the ninth word in each sentence, how he makes it to historian level on the planet, how he helps the people of this planet all to get to the point where they're connected together in the middle. Almost a bit like Joy to the World. Not the best reference, but it's the most recent one. There were so many great opportunities that were missed in this story. He relied on the fact that we just had to try and grasp the fact that these things had all happened in the past, even though we don't see it happening. However, when it comes to the entertainment, not everyone wants to try and fill in the gaps themselves like that. They want it to be challenging, yes, but they want to be given the chance to try and understand it with the visual representation being on the screen as well. And this story does not have that. It's funny though, because this story even has a potential to be an entire story arc. We don't know how the Doctor knew what was going to happen to Belinda in the first place when he came looking for her at that hospital. Now, maybe the reason that we don't know this yet is because that's something we're going to find out later on. Who knows? I'll give it the benefit of the doubt here. What I will say is that it seems to be what I predicted with on the Sense Sphere, is that we're going to have some kind of impossible mystery girl storyline. It was very obvious from the beginning, in my humble opinion. However, with what the Doctor said at the end, suggested that we definitely would get that. I don't know if the Doctor knows exactly what is going on with Belinda, but he says that he met a man who told him her name, but the Doctor can't tell her who it was because of the timelines. So, spoilers, he tells her that piece of information, which is very undoctor-like. I do not want another impossible girl storyline or the mysterious girl storyline. I want the storyline to be stopped for a long time. They did this with Catherine Tate and it worked. However, they just kept repeating it, and they also had the mysterious girl with Clara, and it just became too much. It became way too companion-centric, only because they found that this type of plotline works really well for Doctor Who. We know it was tried and tested with Ace, and by that I mean the story arc, just to be clear, and that it was potentially something that was going to be taken forward. And then RTD decided that when Catherine Tate came along, that it was the right time to do so. He did many story arcs, and he did mini ones for Rose and Martha, and went big with Catherine Tate. There's only so many times that you can do that though, so I think it's time to leave that well alone. Verada Sethu, however, I'm sure I pronounced that wrong, sorry, it's probably the best bit about it. I will talk about her character in just a moment because I think this is important to separate the two. However, I feel like she has got to grips with her character much quicker than Ncuti. I will never say an actor is bad, just so you know, if you are new here, because I know what it's like to be up there acting. Now, I suppose that she's in luck and that she doesn't have a big backlog of other characters to look at in order to assist her with her portrayal, something which Ncuti was not allowed to do. So she could just go with the knowledge that she had done this character before, and that her character now is going to be tied in with the character that she played in Boom, which was Monday Flynn. She plays it extremely well. There are character traits about her character that are left to be desired, I think. However, I believed a lot of what she was doing, and I think she believes a lot in it as well. She had the right amount of energy. She didn't overplay anything. I think she's a fair bit older than Millie Gibson, and that shows. And I'm not being rude to Millie, by the way, by saying that. When you go for the younger companion at Ruby's age, you're going to have a lot more childish and naive traits. I think because Verada is older, no offense to Verada, She brings a much more grown-up presence into the companion character, a bit like Donna, I guess you could say. She has every line delivered in a particular way, and I think that she does a very decent job, even though her character is a bit like a bull in the china shop. She's quite a feminist, I think. She's quite rude. I mean, the character, not Farada. My first impressions of the character are not necessarily great ones. I like the contrast that it has to Ruby Sunday. However, it had a very soapy beginning, and in that beginning, she was just plain rude. A man that loves her does something that's really nice for her and names a star after her. He calls it Miss Belinda Chandra, and she says to him, "Does it have to be Ms. or Miss?" And naturally, he asks her if she's married, because that was her response. When the doctor tries to also defend her, she also says that she does not want him to fight her battles, which she is blamed for on the planet of the Belinda Chandra, and she also does not say thank you to him for saving her. I think she's a little bit selfish. I think the doctor is really going to have to work on bringing her out of her shell. However, it is this character of Belinda Chandra that does the unsubtle messaging that the Doctor Who show has now been very quickly become known for. No, it does not dive into any gender politics, shock horror, but we are getting other lectures about coercive control. Oh yes, for those of you who do not know what coercive control is a type of abuse, and I'm doing it that way because I don't want to get demonetized, in a couple's relationship, and it can be things like ASAULT in verbal form, threats, humiliation, intimidation, or anything else that will harm or punish someone. Now, if you watch the story, you will see that the coercive control is integrated naturally into the plot. Sure, it would have had better context if we had had more of a backstory, but we didn't, and Doctor Who is not a soap. So I don't suppose it would make sense for the visual details to be shown, and it is a children's show after all. It does imply, though, that Alan was always trying to change Belinda in some way through coercive control. And what he has done also to the planet, she deems to be coercive control. Now, think about the definition that I've just given you, and this is a story that is for children. Imagine an adult trying to explain this to their child. Now, in many respects, this does go over children's head. However, it's not guaranteed. Guaranteed, there will be children who will be, "Mummy, Daddy, what's coercive control?" And this could be after a few days, or it could be immediately. It would seem that they are also going to refer to people as incels in this. Yes, okay. So she says planet of the incels. Incel is a portmanteau for involuntary celibacy. Parents thinking coercive control would be difficult to explain. Imagine explaining an incel to a child. And yet we're the ones, if we do not like what is happening in Doctor Who at the moment, when we criticise it, we're the ones who are to blame. No, the pushy messaging is to blame. Bad writing is to blame. Things like coercive control, pronouns, lectures, calling people incels, accommodating for the minority instead of the majority is all to blame. I would not like to be explaining coercive control or an incel to a child if they caught on to the fact that it been mentioned in a very specific way in this story. If Mary Whitehouse was still alive, she'd be crawling all over it. That insult was definitely not needed, and with the coercive control, you didn't need to say that. You can see it on the screen. It had already been integrated into the plot naturally. We didn't need to go there. Fortunately, it's those two bits, or unfortunately in this case, it's those two bits that bring the story right down in the scoring for me, but I will get to the scoring in a moment. Alan is the AI robot. Okay, so this is something that's been integrated into the storyline naturally. Oh my goodness, shock horror, natural plot integration. The reference to AI is that AI is starting to take dominance over a world. My goodness, oh my goodness. I like that allegory because it's very reflective of what's going on today. I also like the twist that it was Alan that was in the robot and it was not an AI robot as we were led to believe. Now, I figured that Alan would be in the story later. It implied that he would. However, I wasn't entirely sure when he was going to appear. So credit where credit is due. I did not expect him to appear in the AI robot. His makeup for that, or the effects for what they did to him, I'm not entirely sure how they did it, but I like it a lot. It was quite grotesque, without being entirely grotesque. He's missing half a body. I also like the idea that the robots led a revolution. I would have also liked to have seen that revolution rather than what we got, but the theory behind it is pretty good in actual fact. They could have told that part of the revolution from Alan's perspective, and I don't think I would have been any the wiser. I will admit that 22 minutes in, I couldn't believe that I was only 22 minutes in, despite what I just said. And yes, we do see Mrs. Flood. She is going to be the new Susan Twist of the series. We do know that she's going to be appearing in every single story. Unfortunately, she is still breaking the fourth wall. So in that case, I don't appreciate that, not for me. A lot of people are still running with the theory that she is the Rani. I'm inclined to say that she's more likely to be someone else. I randomly theorized the other day that she may be Rassilon or the Valiard. However, in many respects, I hope that she's not any of those three characters because I just think we're at the stage now where they need to leave the classic characters alone. There was surprisingly a cliffhanger for this story, and that doesn't happen very often now in New Who for the first story. I mentioned that there was a time fracture, and I'm wondering if this is what we see with the cliffhanger and that it has something to do with the time fracture. The Doctor believes that it is closed. However, we see things like the Eiffel Tower, a car or a taxi or something like that, a page of a calendar with the date 24th not marked off, and other bits and bobs, all being disintegrated in out of space. And also, unless I missed something, how does Belinda know the name of the TARDIS? I don't recall hearing the Doctor telling her that it was. So unless it's something that's going on that will be addressed in the future, then that's pretty careless storytelling. However, I am willing to give them the benefit of the doubt. Hopefully it will pay off. I think that the story is mid at best. I don't think it's any better than that. It certainly was a marked and vast improvement on Space Babies, but what really brought it all the way down was the comments about coercive control and incels in a children's show. I think if they hadn't have done it like that and let the plot run its course naturally without the unsubtle messaging like that, then I would probably be scoring it a lot higher. Another thing that brings it down is the Doctor not being the Doctor. Oh goodness, shock horror about that as well. And the fact that the plot is convoluted, even though it has good ideas. I give this story a 6 out of 10. Let me know what you think. Chat about it, don't shout about it. Like, share, subscribe to the channel, switch on the notification bells so that you know I am releasing another video. We're going to be back tomorrow at 4 p.m. with more Doctor Who content. However, if anything, it will be the overnight ratings if they drop in time, and it will also be the trial of a Time Lord continued. So I will see you tomorrow. Thanks very much for watching. Bye bye.